Okay, let's not beat around the bush here. In my humble opinion, DREDD is one of the simplest, gnarliest, meanest, most efficient and addictively rewatchable works of modern action cinema in the last 15 years. And while my heart is still broken that it never received the success to warrant the sequel, thinking about it now, I'm actually kind of glad it never did. Look, I'm no franchise guy, particularly when it comes to comic books since I don't personally read them, but I always felt DREDD had the potential for a captivating case of the week type miniseries, and I'm sure this will get me in trouble with source material purists, but the fact I've never actually read any of the 2000 AD comics, I think makes me appreciate the film with a certain blissful ignorance. At most, I have vague memories of the PS2 video game and whatever that Stallone movie was that admittedly warped my perception of what Judge Dredd was about, until Alex Garland's absolutely airtight adaptation awakened something inside of me. Now, let me be clear, DREDD is far from a masterpiece. I think it's rated appropriately for what it is, kinda like Thomas Jane's version of The Punisher, where it's rough around the edges, but I have a sweet spot for how it clicks in just the right ways for me. It's certainly no Die Hard, and one could argue the Indonesian action thriller DREDD, which coincidentally released in the same year, is a better version of a mostly similar premise. However, if you've been with me for a while now, you'll know I have a particular soft spot for siege films, and speaking for my own tastes, perhaps the most interesting quality about DREDD is that it evokes a rustic, haphazard storytelling structure similar to John Carpenter's Assault on Precinct 13. To put it bluntly, it respects the viewer's intelligence to engage with what it shows rather than tells, as it brilliantly demonstrates the unbeatable aura that organic world-building has over conventional exposition dumps. I'm pretty sure I've said this in a couple of videos before, but it's why the first John Wick will always stand apart from its sequels to me. While their choreography and technical prowess get better with each installment, what makes the original John Wick such a curious rewatch is how it leaves you to piece together all these exotic intricacies that make its enigmatic assassin underworld stand apart. In fact, DREDD originally released about 2-3 weeks apart from another sci-fi action thriller called Looper, which got all the praise and box office galore, but I personally did not like it because it felt like the kind of film that thought it was so clever it needed to constantly explain its world rather than just letting it live and breathe. Again, I've said these things countless times before, but it's incredibly subjective if you prefer more overt traditional storytelling structure or indulging in uncertainty, mystery, and ambiguity. Even I occasionally flip-flop on this, but more often than not, I strongly lean on the latter because there truly is a unique power to leaving the audience wanting more, and the fact DREDD never got further installments works to the effect of leaving its existence an obscure rough gem in cult comic book action cinema. When it comes to action movies, I'm often drawn to ones that find a way to balance the power fantasy with a tangible sense of threat and vulnerability. It's why I think Die Hard is the greatest action movie, period. I like an action movie that is still gleefully fun and exciting, but also doesn't surrender evocative tension and suspense, which is something I find most action movies today often struggle with. I know this opinion isn't anything new, of course, but I want to go through a complex ringer of emotion. I want our badass hero to get through it with the skin of their teeth. I want action movies to recapture their inherent and somewhat needed provocativeness. And DREDD, to me, just now and again satisfies that appetite. Now, before we blow open the door of justice, this video is sponsored by Vezi. No matter the weather, we should all be able to say yes to adventure, and Vezi's goal is to empower you to step into every opportunity without hesitation, from road trips and hikes to simply running errands around town or walking your dog. With Vezi's Stormburst, you are prepared for every possibility, whether it be wet sidewalks, muddy trails, sleet, snow, ice, or steep, uneven terrain. I actually wear Vezi Stormburst quite often when walking Cheddar because, as you can imagine, he's incredibly spontaneous and thus isn't one to stick to the beaten path, instead choosing to excitably venture us up slippy forest hills and through deceptively deep puddles. However, like all of Vezi's footwear range, Stormburst are 100% waterproof and designed with lightweight breathable Dymatex material, which allows for a compact and sturdy shoe without the overbearing weight and rigidness of your average walking boot. Stormburst have unbelievable grip to provide better traction acceleration and safety on slippery surfaces, which for someone as boring and risk-averse as me when it comes to walking, goes that extra bit further to encouraging me to take surprising and curious detours. Take the first step toward adventure with Vezi by visiting vezi.com/ryanhollinger to keep your outdoor adventure comfortable and dry, explore confidently, and enjoy 15% off your first pair at checkout. For the uninitiated, DREDD tells a story of a post-apocalyptic dystopian metropolis coldly and fittingly named Mega City 1, which encompasses a significant portion of the US from Boston to DC, where outside its walls lies nothing but a nuclear wasteland. The city is overseen by what is effectively an authoritarian regime where law enforcers known as judges are given absolute power to act as judge, jury, and executioner to anyone suspected of crime. It's alluded to that the Hall of Justice are in an endless war against violent gangs ravaging the city and are struggling to retain control of a world that's long past the point of no return, with morality and humanity becoming foreign concepts that even the titular Judge Dredd has long given up on. The thing is, much of your perception of this world from the outset is essentially molded by your own personal disposition on crime, punishment, and the justice system, as the story takes a somewhat neutralized approach to scattering out loose criticisms and observations through the opposing perspectives of its characters.
Neutral? You're not neutral, you're choosing sides.
While I don't feel like the film outright interrogates its world with a self-righteous demeanor that would frankly feel out of place in the context of the film's life or death scenario, it does a really clever job of subtly sowing seeds to much larger and complex issues with the state of depravity, urban decay, and the debatably dehumanizing and ineffective methods of the justice system itself. Ultimately though, you can just put all of that to one side and enjoy the film for purely what it is, a day-in-the-life police procedural where we begin firmly in the shoes of the cynical and reputable Judge Dredd, who, relative to the world around him, is basically just another officer doing the rounds until he's tasked with conducting a routine recruitment examination to see if the fresh-faced rookie Judge Anderson is fit for duty. The thing is, the film actually spends just as much time in Anderson's shoes, as she's presented as a zealous, although questionably naive hopeful, who thinks she can make the world a better place without simply resorting to the same aggressive measures used by other judges. Dredd, however, firmly disagrees, but it's strongly alluded to that there's a personal reason behind his seething wrath, which is hinted at after Anderson attempts to read his mind when it's revealed she's a mutant with psychic abilities, having lived in the irradiated wasteland most of her life. You could say she's a fitting philosophical adversary to Dredd, because while she never outright criticizes his actions and commands, you can see how increasingly conflicted she becomes through sheer visuals and performance as she witnesses the humanity beneath what Dredd bluntly considers scum, bringing a layer of empathy to the chaos. Now, as far as the actual plot is concerned, in any other film, this would usually be set up as a sort of high-stakes buddy cop adventure where the quirky, moral center Anderson eventually unmasks the heart of gold deep within the stone-cold, brooding Judge Dredd. However, on the surface, while it does kind of go in that direction, as Dredd does warm up to Anderson's judgment by the end, the movie is satirically resigned to reminding you that the absolutely insane escalation of events that transpire, where Dredd and Anderson raid a drug operation inside a 200-story apartment complex, is just another average day in the life of Judge Dredd. It creates this mega cinematic illusion that this is a significant breakthrough operation against the war on gangs, but nihilistically it's framed by Dredd himself as just one of 17,000 serious crimes reported daily in a city of over 800 million residents, where they can only respond to 6% on any given day. As such, this specific case that begins with them investigating 3 homicides site at the happily named Peachtree apartment complex is chosen sheerly at random by DREDD to test Anderson, rather than because it has any tangible impact on the future of the city. They literally go after some random drug dealer who, sure, oversees a big-scale operation manufacturing a narcotic called slow-mo that does exactly what it says on the tin, but she's not exactly Pablo Escobar level of importance. Again, it's made to feel like just another average thing within Mega City 1, a small blip in the grand scheme of a shitty, hopelessly unfixable world. In DREDD's eyes, which I assume he has, I mean he never takes off his helmet, each day is simply about dispensing justice at all costs. He never shares any enlightened opinion on the issue, even if it's implied he's fueled by a deep-seated motivation. He recognizes his place in the world as simply a cog in the machine just doing his job. He doesn't aspire to change or save the world. He isn't zealous, ambitious, or indeed all that patriotic. In fact, he seems apathetically resigned to his insignificance, which makes him far more compelling than if he were all those things. Hell, perhaps the grimmest reminder of this is when DREDD tells Anderson that if she ever gets captured, it's better she saves a bullet for herself, which goes to show how unfazed by death DREDD ultimately is. Anyway, this point is first established when we meet our ruthless drug lord Mama, who has 3 of her dealers drugged, skinned alive, and thrown off the top balcony of a tower block as punishment for insubordination, prompting DREDD and Anderson to raid an apartment and arrest her second-in-command Kay, which triggers Mama to instigate a lockdown and demand her gang and the local residents execute the judges before they can go back to the daily grind. As a result, DREDD and Anderson are forced to ascend the complex to apprehend Mama, less so out of a means of survival and more so because DREDD wishes to dispatch justice without any regard for the overwhelming odds stacked against them. Although when danger intensifies to insane levels, you do start to see subtle chinks in his armor when he devolves from a RoboCop force of nature to someone resembling an actual human being with actual flaws. There's a fallibility that begins to unravel from DREDD, not so much that he's a completely different character by the end, but enough to suggest he's much more human than he wants us to believe. It first calls attention to this when Mama decides to go scorched earth on an entire floor of the apartment complex, by using Gatling guns to mow down everyone in her path, leaving DREDD stunned at the spike escalation in violence, and describing the massacre as overkill, which is the word I think perfectly summarizes exactly how this world operates. Everything is done with unnecessary excess. Nothing is a half measure. It's hotshot, it's skin them alive, it's incendiary, it's massacring an entire floor of innocent people to kill one guy. Everyone always seems to resort to hilarious extremes. Hell, when Anderson eventually does get captured by Kay, much to DREDD's foreshadowing, he tries to use his gun on her, but the ID fails, causing the fucking gun to explode. There's no way its overindulgent nature isn't satirically deliberate. It's also prominently shown when we see characters using slow-mo, which not only slows everything down to entrancing effect, but is hyper-stylized with high saturation and gleamy sparkles like a shitty Snapchat filter. I always felt the point of it was to be explicitly artificial, with how the drug is only a temporary escape from an ugly existence like polishing a turd, because you can still see the grimy, nauseating world behind it all. I know a few people who say the film takes itself too seriously, but I disagree completely. I think it's incredibly pulpy, even veering into pure campiness, with cheesy one-liners and cartoonish grotesqueness. It nails just the right balance between gritty and absurd. In fact, I actually sometimes think of it like the satire in Starship Troopers. DREDD is almost walking propaganda for the feeling system in place. He's all about extreme action without compromise, going as far as to dehumanize the citizens around him to an objective rulebook without any regard for the desperation, struggles, and inequality around them.
Interesting.
Anderson even vaguely alludes to that in her perspective, it doesn't even seem like a judge's job is really about justice, but rather instilling fear of the law, which surely makes it pointless when the world already lives in fear of what opposes the law. The residents of the tower block are terrified of Mama, who took control of the complex after wiping out all other rival gangs in the area, and it does make a direct point about the prejudice in the film's justice system at not showing consideration for those complicit or an accessory to crimes due to the threat of violence and death they're controlled by. Specifically, Mama's computer expert literally had his eyes gouged out by her and replaced with implants, and now essentially serves as her hostage. And by the end of the film, Anderson lets him go, only to be scorned by DREDD as a failure of her duties, to which she counters by arguing justice is served by letting the victim go, leaving DREDD to concede and nod in genuine agreement. It's small moments like this that show the humanity in DREDD. It certainly doesn't justify her actions, but Mama herself has an incredibly tragic and traumatic backstory, having been assaulted and mutilated, and now motivated by an understandable vengeance. In effect, while they're on the opposite sides of the law, Mama and DREDD seem to share a similar anger for the world and a need to control it. On a slightly lighter note, there's even another moment earlier in the film when two kids try to confront the judges and DREDD offers them body bags or juvie cubes, but when an abrupt skirmish breaks out, seeing him switch to stun rounds demonstrates some essence of humanity within him. But of course, this moment of breaking character is immediately undone when, in the next scene, overkill.
Incendiary.
Eventually, 4 corrupt judges arrive to stir the pot, but what's funny is that DREDD immediately picks up on their bullshit, because not only is their sudden arrival during a lockdown a tad bit suspicious, but DREDD calls them out for not addressing him with the proper protocol, which is wonderfully in character that the giveaway was an administrative oversight. It even doubles down on how deliberately anticlimactic it is when Anderson later escapes captivity and is confronted by a judge who in the prior scene explains her foolproof plan to catch Anderson off guard, but what she doesn't know is that Anderson can read people's minds. In the midst of it all though, there's a curious detail that conveys the overarching nihilism, when one corrupt judge acutely describes the world as a meat grinder and the judges simply turn the lever, suggesting judges are only perpetuating the vicious cycle and their jobs are ineffective to the point of redundant. Again, it infers to deeper, grander issues within the Hall of Justice, but for now at least, this isn't DREDD's issue to worry about. After killing the judges and mending a shot wound from a piercing round, DREDD reteams with Anderson to finally take down Mama, who in overkill fashion has now connected her heart rate to explosives that will detonate and destroy the upper floors if her heart stops. In a brilliant payoff to the slow-mo drug, DREDD poetically uses her own methods against her, and gives her slow-mo and throws her off the balcony, where upon reaching the bottom, the signal will be out of range and unable to trigger the bombs. The day finally ends, or rather morning begins, with DREDD giving Anderson a pass, and that's basically his Tuesday shift complete. On to the next one, I guess.